Hey everyone, Internet PCS book reader here. Today I want to talk about The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. I mostly know Maggie O'Farrell writing from her previous book Hamnet, which I've read before I made this channel, but it is my top 5 my top 10 books I've read in 2022. I can only describe her writing as sublime. The story and characters are amazing, but her writing just took it to another level. While I haven't read any of her other works, but since this new one came out and got shortlisted in 2023 Women's Prize for Fiction, I thought I'd give it a try. If in Hamlet, the author retold the story of how Hamlet was made by Shakespeare through the lens of his wife Agnes, in The Marriage Portrait, we follow the story of the Duchess of Ferrara in 1561, Lucrezia de Medici from the famous House of Medici. At 16, 1 year into her marriage, while traveling to a remote location with her husband, she came to a realization that her husband is going to kill her during this travel. We then travel back to 1544 to Lucrezia's mother Eleonora, and we'll see how Lucrezia's life starting from how, as the fifth child, she's not as calm as the other four before her, so her mother separated her from her siblings and did not take care of her. How she grew up to love painting, and how eventually she was paired with the Duke that later on will turn out to be the psychopath that want to kill her. The story will go back and forth between her growing up and her finding a way to survive from her murderer. The writing still have that amazing prose-like quality. There's a scene with the tiger captured by her father, and the fiction of the scene is the tigress didn't so much pace as pour herself, as if her very essence was molten, simmering, like the ooze from a volcano. It was hard to distinguish the bars of the cage from the dark, repeating stripes on the creature's fur. The animal was orange, burnished gold, fire made flesh. She was power and anger. She was vicious and exquisite. She carried on her body the birthmark of a prison, as if she had been branded for exactly this, as if captivity had been her destiny all along. Then the scene when one of the teachers at their house found out about Lucrezia's painting skill. How can this be the work of a child so small, so quiet that he often forgets she is there? It seems so unlikely that the tutor can think of no other explanation. He tries for a feeling of outrage that the child should have been paying attention to his lesson instead of sketching. But the image is so compelling, so arresting, that his teacherly disapproval dissolves. Then another scene when she was in such a denial about what the Duke was about to do to her. He cannot mean her harm, because he wants her to kiss him. And here are his lips beneath hers now, and there is pressure, his mouth covering hers, his large hands closing around the back of her head. And no one would do that if they meant to, if they intended to, if they were planning to. No, it's impossible. She must be mistaken. He must love her after all. He must treasure and respect her, because no one would kiss someone like this, with passion and heat and mouth and the slash of a tongue tip, would they? No one would think of killing someone at the same time as kissing them, as if they meant to pour their very soul into them. Personally, just with Hamnet, I think Maggie O'Farrell is definitely one of the best writers there is. I can imagine her books turning into classic in a future where I am no longer. With Hamnet and The Marriage Portrait, she managed to find these people in history that should have had more story about them but just don't, and then imagine their life beside the more famous people in their life in a way that I can only describe as an explosion of creativity. And as a famous character once said, explosion is art. It is a whodunit story mixed with doom by the narrative characters, which is a tight balance that needed a level of writing that is way above the average. Because if it is not done right, it could really feel, hey guys, she's going to die, you know guys? She's going to die. Isn't that sad guys? You're sad, right? Which makes the story more grating and annoying instead of touching. But if it is done right, you won't be able to take your eyes off the story. You'll cling to a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, things will be better for the characters. And there's something compelling in that terrifying hope. And I think that part is done really well in this book. Unfortunately, the story is really slow and it's not in a good slow burn kind of way. There are various setbacks that slow the pacing of the story. For one, Lucrezia is a very boring main character. Her every movement and conversation feels sluggish like you're in deep water. Every time she talks to someone or someone talks to her, questions are often repeated. While some of them are for a good reason, it happens too many times that it started feeling unnecessary after a while. It felt like a story full of people hard of hearing. She's also such a passive character that it is hard to cheer for her. I think she was supposed to have a rebellious bone somewhere in her, but it didn't shine through enough to be seen in the story. So it felt more like things happening around her instead of her affecting the story. She's also depicted as a talented painter in the story, which might be a callback to the title of the book, and also it adds to why she is so observant to everything that happened to her surrounding. But mostly what came out is a lot of description about the views that she encountered, which might work if it's in a movie or even a webtoon. You can add a beautiful scenery at the background and everything in just one page or a few seconds. But in a book, it halts the story to a stop each time she looks at a new background. I was at space 250 out of 430 pages, way past the halfway point, and I still have to read about statues for a few pages before the story continues. The premise of the story itself is really interesting. A woman born in 1500 France who was raised less like a person and more like a political tool, and then handed over to a sociopath guy who cannot give birth, but it's 1500, so there is no divorce due to religious reasons, and that is the only way out of the marriage, especially as a duke that needs to stay face above all else. In the real version of him, Duke Alfonso will go on to marry another two women without having a child, so rumors of murder circulates about the guy. Then there's the casualness of how cruel the people in Lucrezia's life, which is depicted really well. There was a scene where it is subtle but also quite obvious how even the brother at her house had a higher position than her, the daughter of the Grand Duke. So there are part of the book that is really good, it's just overall a bit too slow in its pacing. If you haven't read Hamnet and wanted to read this, I'd suggest you read this first before reading Hamnet, because it is from the same author. You cannot help but compare the two of them. And Hamnet I think might be the outer magnum opus. It's the kind of story that will stay with you and will live rent-free in your head long after you finish it. And unfortunately for this book, 10 out of 10 times it will be outshined by Hamnet if you compare the two of them. I give this a 3.5. That's about it.